Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back, man. Got another great video for you guys today, as usual, man. You guys know the deal on this channel. It's all about setting the record straight, stopping the lies, stopping the narrative, stopping them from rewriting history, guys. And in this video, man, I want to talk about a little baseball in this video, man. Do something a little bit different. Shout out to my man Too Raw for TV. I saw a video he did a couple of days ago, and it was about Darryl Strawberry talking about Barry Bonds and how he viewed Barry Bonds as the greatest baseball player that he had ever saw, right? And he was in awe of Barry Bonds. Like the minute he saw him as a young kid, and he was like, man, this kid is special. You know, we got to keep an eye on this kid. And I wanted to do a video and talk about this because I thought it was very interesting, because you guys know how I feel about Darryl Strawberry. He was probably like my favorite baseball player, like the first baseball player that I really liked when I was young. And, you know, I was a fan of Barry Bonds. And I told you guys, Ken Griffey Jr., these are some of my favorite baseball players when I was little. And it was interesting to hear him talk about Barry Bonds and what he felt. And I thought that in this video, I would give my thoughts on Barry Bonds or what he was saying. And then I just wanted to, you know, mention some of the other players that I remember from the 80s into the 90s that played in Major League Baseball that I remember. You know, I just want to mention some of these guys. And I just thought it would be, you know, good to do a video and touch on some of these players from the 80s and the 90s that I grew up watching. Maybe you remember some of these guys, maybe you don't. So yeah, in this video, I just wanted to talk about that, guys. I thought it was interesting, man. And I want to thank you guys, everyone across the world, everyone across the states, man, has been supporting my channel. Once again, guys, you know I am truly humbled. Much respect to all you guys that continue to roll with me, man, that continue to come through the live streams, donate to the channel. You guys leave the comments, you email me the messages, you guys share your stories with me, all of that stuff, guys. It means a lot. Thank you very much. And you guys know what to do. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, like I said, man, shout out to Too Raw. I saw he did a video on Darryl Strawberry in the comments that Darryl Strawberry had made in relation to Barry Bonds and how he felt that Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player that he had ever seen, right? Barry Bonds could do everything on the field, Darryl Strawberry was saying. And I think a lot of people agree with Darryl Strawberry. I don't know if we can sit back and say that it's a majority of people feel that Barry Bonds is the greatest baseball player of all time. I think that we can all agree that Barry Bonds' legacy has taken a hit, you know, with all the allegations and, you know, all the accusations, you know, that were levied against him when he was, you know, playing, you know, at the end of his career over there on the San Francisco Giants. And I've said many times on this channel, I've talked about Barry Bonds before, I've mentioned him before, and I've told you, in my opinion, Barry Bonds has 2 Hall of Fame careers. If you look at his career, he played long enough, and you look at what he did on the Pittsburgh Pirates, and you look at what he did in the San Francisco Giants, to me, it's 2 Hall of Fame careers. So if you want to, you know, knock Barry Bonds for, you know, whatever you think he did, or, you know, messing up the integrity of the game or the spirit of the game, all that, all right, I get it. But there's no denying that Barry Bonds was a Hall of Famer before any of these suspicions or allegations were levied against him when he was playing on the Pittsburgh Pirates. The dude was sensational. And what Darryl Strawberry was talking about, and what the reason why I wanted to do a video on this, because I thought it was great what Darryl Strawberry was saying, because he didn't have to take away from anyone else to lift up Barry Bonds or to celebrate Barry Bonds or to talk about him in that way. He didn't have to tear down any of the great players that maybe are mentioned as the greatest baseball players of all time. Because I've told you many times, baseball was my first sport. That was the first sport that I ever played organized, guys. The first sport. I remember when I was 6 years old, man, I played Inwood Little League, right, in New York City, in Inwood Park. It was Inwood Little League, man. I remember that was my first experience playing organized sports, was baseball. That was my first love, man. I loved baseball, right? Like I said, it started at 6 years old. And I remember watching baseball that young, guys. I remember a lot of this stuff, as you guys can tell on my channel with my videos. It's not just about basketball that I remember, but I also remember a lot of the baseball stuff from back in them days, man. Like I said, baseball was my first sport, my first love. So guys like Darryl Strawberry, that was like the first guys that I was, you know, really into, the first athletes that I really, you know, gravitated towards was someone like Darryl Strawberry. I told you, when I was growing up in New York City, the Mets were the team of the 80s, you know, more so than the Yankees were. But Darryl Strawberry was a big-time guy on the Mets in New York City in the mid to late 80s. You know, we know the 86 Mets won the World Series. But in 1988, Darryl Strawberry was sensational. The Mets were really good. Like I told you, in the mid to late 80s, the Mets were the team of the city, man. It wasn't the Yankees until like the 90s came around and they became, much more popular of a team, and they started winning much more consistent again, because there was a little bit of a drought there for the Yankees in the 80s there when you had guys like Don Manley there. And like I said, Don Manley was my uncle's favorite baseball player. Shout out to Don Manley. But yeah, man, so like I said, Darryl Strawberry was my favorite player. I told you, my dad used to call me the straw man because I was left-handed. I played outfield like Darryl Strawberry. I played center field, but I was left-handed like Darryl Strawberry. And I think we all, agree that one of the prettiest swings in all of baseball was Darryl Strawberry's swing, man. I told you, man, when you think about him, and I think about someone like Ken Griffey Jr., just that effortless swing. I used to always like Gary Sheffield's swing too, man. Gary Sheffield had that crazy bat. That bat would be like this, and he just but you know what I'm saying, guys. Darryl Strawberry's swing was beautiful. But yeah, I thought it was really, nice to hear Darryl Strawberry say those things about Barry Bonds, someone who's getting a lot of, Barry Bonds gets a lot of quote-unquote hate, right? And, like I said, it's really sad because Barry Bonds, like I said, you can argue is the greatest baseball player of all time. And it was really nice to hear Darryl Strawberry speak about Barry Bonds in that way without having to take away or diminish the legacies of a Babe Ruth or a Hank Aaron or Willie Mays, a Jackie Robinson or, a Lou Gehrig, and these, great baseball players, that played that you could consider the, greatest players of all time or some of the greatest hitters of all time. So like I said, it was really nice to hear him talk about Barry Bonds without having to take away from other great players, because that's what we see a lot now, right? In order for someone to lift up a player into that realm, they have to take away from other eras or other players or, make all kinds of weird excuses and stuff like that so that you can see what they're trying to say. Darryl Strawberry just simply said, listen, for what I've seen, right, the people that I've been around, since I've been involved in baseball, when I saw Barry Bonds, man, and I watched him play, he said to me, he's the greatest baseball player of all time. He could do everything on the field. And that's the thing about baseball that makes it really tough sometimes to quantify, who the greatest baseball player of all time is, because baseball is such a team sport that you can't necessarily look at team success to, say this person is the greatest baseball player of all time. So, for example, I've told you guys in the past, and I talked about it in a live stream before, how Mike Trout was seen by many people over the last 10, 15 years to be the best baseball player and arguably the greatest baseball player of all time. But the man's never even been to a World Series, never even sniffed a World Series. But people felt this way and feel this way about Mike Trout because, like I said, baseball is such a team-oriented sport. It's not necessarily based off of your team's success to prove that you're the greatest baseball player of all time, right? You don't need a bunch of World Series titles to be the greatest baseball player of all time. By all accounts, a lot of people consider Willie Mays to be the greatest baseball player of all time. If I remember correctly, I believe Willie Mays has one World Series championship. I could be wrong on this, but it's not like he has like 4, 5, 6 World Series championships, and that's why they consider him the greatest baseball player of all time. So, we have to understand this. So, like I said, in this video, man, I wanted to mention some of the players that I grew up watching that I want to thank in this video just by mentioning them, that, a lot of these guys don't get mentioned ever, and I don't really do a lot of baseball videos because I fall in love with baseball. Like I told you, it was my first love as far as sports goes. I played baseball all through high school. And then once I graduated, I just really never got into baseball again. You stop playing organized sports, if you don't play in college or the pros, and you kind of fall for some of the stuff. I played in a couple of softball leagues in the past, but playing actual hardball is not really a thing anymore for someone like me and where I am in my life, right? I'll still play basketball. I can go on the basketball court, still play basketball. Same thing with football. I used to play in the flag football leagues. I haven't played flag football in probably 10 years, if not longer. So it's different, but I can still go throw a football around. I don't necessarily go in the backyard and throw the baseball around. My son is not really, he plays baseball, but I can tell he doesn't really enjoy it right now because baseball at this age for kids when they're 6, 7, 8, 9 years old is tough, right? Because baseball, sometimes I got these kids out there in the field and they're standing around not doing anything, right? You're waiting for someone to hit the ball. I told you could spend the entire game, right, in the center field and no one ever hit a ball to you. That can happen in baseball, right? You could play out there in the outfield and no one ever hit anything to you. You could spend the entire 9 innings doing nothing, right? I got kids digging in the dirt. I got kids pulling out grass, right? You got kids chasing the bugs and stuff. Just not paying attention. It's hard because there's not a lot of excitement going on at certain parts of baseball. But anyway, guys, because I wanted to mention some of these guys that I grew up watching, like I said, in the 80s to the 90s, I'm not saying that these are the greatest players of the 80s and the 90s, anything. There's not a list of 1 through anything. I think I came up with 40 names here. I just, off the top of my head, guys, I did not look into anything. Oh, let me look up these guys and remember. This, off the top of my head, when I heard Darryl Strawberry's comments talking about Barry Bonds, and I don't know, like I said, for me, baseball is tough to just say, hey, Barry Bonds, greatest baseball player of all time. For me, if I'm going to say of what I watched, the people that I watched, it's tough, man. To me, Ken Griffey Jr. might have been a little bit better. I don't know if Ken Griffey Jr. was a better athlete than Barry Bonds. I don't believe that he was. But I think as far as what Ken Griffey Jr. could do behind the plate, in the field, running the bases, right? Like a Barry Bonds, he could do everything. I think that Ken Griffey Jr. to me, he was, like I said, to me, Ken Griffey Jr. could have been the greatest baseball player of all time if he didn't have those injuries towards the end of his career, the later part of his career. But Ken Griffey Jr. to me, it's tough, man. He might be the best baseball player that I've ever seen, watched for like a 10-year span there. I mean, Ken Griffey Jr. was sensational. But Barry Bonds, man, like I said, man, to me, the guy was amazing. But anyway, like I said, I want to mention some of these guys, man. So obviously Barry Bonds, I think I came with 40 names. I think this was just off the top of my head, guys. Like I said, so some of these guys, you might remember, some of you don't remember. I might have missed some guys here. Maybe you have some guys that you want to throw down in the comment section that you remember from the 80s and the 90s. Like I said, I remember baseball from about 6 years old. So from about 86, 87, all the way till now, I remember a lot of these guys. I probably have been a huge baseball fan, and probably, I want to say probably 15 years, man, since probably about 2010-ish, somewhere around there. I think the Yankees won their last World Series in 09, and I kind of stopped watching baseball around 2011-ish, I want to say. I don't know. I got, busy with life and other sports, like I said, football, basketball kind of take over. College football I'm big into. So anyway, so we talked about Barry Bonds and Darryl Strawberry. Like I told you guys, my favorite baseball player. To me, Darryl Strawberry had the talent to be the greatest baseball player of all time. We all know that drugs derailed his career heavily because he was, to me, still rising when he started to have these issues. But Darryl Strawberry, to me, and people really, Darryl Strawberry's like 6'6", man. This is a big dude right here. He's tall, Darryl Strawberry, man. So shout out to Darryl Strawberry with that beautiful swing. Ken Griffey Jr. I did a poll this morning about Rickey Henderson. Rickey Henderson, one of my favorite players growing up, man. Whenever I think of Rickey Henderson, I always think about Rickey Henderson running. As a kid who was always into speed and running fast, I played running back in football, and I was a base stealer when I played baseball. I was the kind of guy like a Rickey Henderson where, I remember coaches used to telling me I wasn't a power hitter or a guy that, as I got older, they were like, yo, man, you use that speed. So hit the ball on the ground and leg them out. And I used to do that. I used to do that a lot, man. I would bunt, and just do these drag bunts sometimes and then run down the baseline and beat a lot of these infield hits out because of my speed. But Rickey Henderson was a guy that I always loved because, like I said, he was a great athlete. He was super fast. He was aggressive. Like I said, he ran the bases. Stealing bases to me is one of the most exciting things of baseball. When I was growing up, I thought stealing bases was so cool. And I felt like back in the day, stealing bases was such an art form. It was really the way for baseball players to show their athleticism, their aggression, their instincts, all this kind of stuff when you think about baseball overall. So Rickey Henderson was, like I said, one of my favorite players. And you can argue that Rickey Henderson is the greatest baseball player of all time. I've seen people say that. I think that Rickey Henderson is probably the greatest leadoff hitter in the history of the game. It's arguably, like I said, it's tough in baseball, but you can argue this for Rickey Henderson. So rest in peace to Rickey Henderson. Shout out to Rickey Henderson. Like I said, one of the great players that I grew up watching. Played for the New York Yankees for a couple of years, but we all remember him from the Oakland Athletics. So shout out to Rickey Henderson. Ozzie Smith, another player that I grew up, one of the great players in the history of the game. Ozzie Smith, right, the Wizard, used to do the backflips, right? Remember, you could argue Ozzie Smith's the greatest shortstop of all time. When I was growing up, I don't even think there was an argument. I think pretty much everyone was saying that Ozzie Smith was the greatest shortstop in the history of the game. Played forever, like a Omar Vizquel. These guys played for like 20 years. Baseball is different like that. You guys can play for a long time. It's not a physical game like that. So shout out to Ozzie Smith. Just a class personified. One of the great players at that position. One of the great players in the history of Major League Baseball history. So shout out to Ozzie Smith. The guy who just played with a lot of joy and, like I said, a flair to him. Like I said, those backflips, man. We all remember Ozzie Smith. Cal Ripken Jr., another great player when I was growing up watching the game, man. Shout out to Cal Ripken Jr. Love Cal Ripken Jr., a true Iron Man. You know, a lot of times now we talk about longevity and people being Iron Men, but Cal Ripken Jr. was a legit Iron Man. Like, this dude obviously set the record, you know, all these consecutive games, and just the obligation he felt to the people, to the game of baseball, to go out there, give that effort, and be there for his teammates, you know, every single night. So shout out to Cal Ripken Jr., man, a true professional. Like, these guys were professionals, man. Cal Ripken Jr. You know what's funny, too, with a lot of these guys that I'm going to read off here, and I'm going to try to go a little bit quick because this list is really long, is I remember a lot of these guys, and we remember a lot of these great players, guys, because we collected cards, right? Baseball cards, basketball cards, football cards. These days, it's not the same, right? Kids don't really collect cards like they used to. Now, everybody's like trying to get the special card. Oh, I want to get this special card that's worth $100,000 and the autograph, you know, signature series card. And that's not what it was for us when we were kids in the 80s and the 90s. It wasn't about how much the card was worth necessarily, especially when I was a kid. It wasn't about the money. It was about the players on the cards, who they were. And that's how we knew these players a lot of times, right? You go out there and you collect these cards. You read about them on the back of their card, right? You find that information about these guys. Remember, the stats are always on the back of the card. The players are on the front because the players matter more than the stats, right? So this is how we know a lot of these guys and remember a lot of these guys. I still have a lot of baseball cards and football cards and basketball cards to this day. So shout out to all you guys that ever collected basketball cards or football cards or baseball cards. Or I remember Garbage Pail Kids cards. Garbage Pail Kids were very popular. Shout out to Eddie Murray. Eddie Murray, another great player out there. Eddie Murray. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker through this list, man, with some of this stuff. But Eddie Murray, another great player that you don't really hear mentioned. Him and Cal Ripken Jr., a great tandem out there for the Baltimore Orioles for many years. Tony Gwynn, arguably the greatest hitter in the history of the game. Tony Gwynn, I mean, you couldn't strike the man out. You couldn't get the man out. The man was a hit machine. Tony Gwynn. I mean, I remember reading some stat about Tony Gwynn, like the amount of strikeouts that he had in his career was like so little, so few. You couldn't get the man out. You couldn't strike him out. The dude was like a hit machine, man. Just a great at the plate. Shout out to Tony Gwynn, man. All the years that he played over there in the San Diego Padres. Shout out to Benito Santiago, played on the San Diego Padres for many years with Tony Gwynn. Benito Santiago, one of the great catchers of that time from the 80s and the 90s. How many times have you guys heard Benito Santiago's name mentioned? So shout out to Benito Santiago. How about Bobby Bonilla? Bobby Bonilla, shout out to Bobby Bonilla. Played with Barry Bonds over in Pittsburgh, right? They had a great 1-2 combo there. Bobby Bonilla and Barry Bonds, the BBs. So shout out to Bobby Bonilla, the guy who was getting paid from the Mets. He might still be getting paid from the Mets. I'm not even sure, but shout out to Bobby Bonilla. Ryan Sandberg just passed away not that long ago. So rest in peace to Ryan Sandberg. And shout out to Ryan Sandberg, one of the players I remember played for Chicago Cubs for a lot of years. I want to say Ryan Sandberg was a first baseman, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember. I believe he won an MVP, Ryan Sandberg, in the 80s. So shout out to Ryan Sandberg, man, one of the great players I remember growing up. Nolan Ryan, another great player who played forever. I mean, when we used to talk about longevity, they used to talk about Nolan Ryan a lot. I remember Nolan Ryan started playing baseball in like the 60s. And when I was in the 80s, he was still playing. So shout out to Nolan Ryan, who played up until like the 90s, I think. Nolan Ryan played, he was like 46 years old or something like that. So shout out to Nolan Ryan, one of the great pitchers of all time. You know, I remember when I was growing up, they argued he was the greatest pitcher of all time, up there with guys like Cy Young and Sandy Koufax. So shout out to Nolan Ryan. Roger Clemens, right? Of the same ilk, right? We know Roger Clemens has got a lot of, things going on, and he's not in the Hall of Fame, and all the suspicions surrounding Roger Clemens. And to me, Roger Clemens, he didn't carry himself with a lot of integrity or a lot of class. I felt like when the accusations came out, I watched that court hearing with him and the McNamara guy when they went in front of the Senate committee or whatever it was, and he was testifying in front of them. Roger Clemens, he lost a lot of respect from me. Not as a player, but as a man. The way that he carried himself and the way he spoke, I didn't like it, man. Like I said, he came across as very arrogant, almost as if like a Lance Armstrong type of guy. Like, you got caught out there, but you're so arrogant, you start trying to attack everyone else's integrity, like Lance Armstrong did to that guy who, called him out, Landis, I think his name was. Same thing that Roger Clemens did. He tried to attack the integrity of McNamara to make him look like a bad person or a dirtbag just because he told on him, right? He was a rat. We get it. But Roger Clemens did not handle himself or carry himself great anyway. But he's a great pitcher, Roger Clemens. Amazing Roger Clemens. I remember anyone that, if you had a Roger Clemens baseball card growing up, man, you try to hold on to that joint, man. Same thing with the Nolan Ryan cards. And a lot of these guys' cards, you wanted to hold on to these. They were special to get one of their cards. Wade Boggs, another great player. Wade Boggs, another hit machine. Guy with over 3,000 hits. won a championship, World Series with the Yankees. Played for the Boston Red Sox for a lot of years, man. Shout out to Wade Boggs. Mark McGwire, right? We all know Mark McGwire, right? His name comes up a lot. He's not really a forgotten player. But he's not going to get to the Hall of Fame for the reasons that we talked about Roger Clemens and the Barry Bondses. But Mark McGwire was a very popular player. Him, another guy, Jose Canseco, right? They were a tandem on the Oakland Athletics. The Oakland Athletics had a really good team. They had guys like, another guy I want to mention, Dave Stewart, right? Another great player from the Oakland Athletics. Dennis Eckersley, that I wrote down here. Frank Thomas. You guys remember Frank Thomas, the Big Hurt? Used to love Frank Thomas, man. Now I don't really like Frank Thomas because he does these stupid Total T commercials that I told you, to me, are BS. But shout out to Frank Thomas, man, who was, like I said, was one of the great home run hitters of all time, man. Frank Thomas. Cecil Fielder, similar to a Frank Thomas, right? These big hulking guys that would just crush the ball. First baseman. Shout out to Cecil Fielder. Remember his son. What's his son's name? Damn, of course, I can't remember his son's name. But remember, his son was in the league for a while, man, doing his thing. George Brett, another great player. George Brett, once again, another guy who played for the same team, the Kansas City Royals, for like 20 years, man. A lot of these guys played for the same team for years and years and years, man, all right? Years and years and years. When we're talking about someone like Cal Ripken Jr., the Eddie Murrays, the Tony Gwynns, the Benito Santiagos, the Ryan Sandbergs, right? Wade Boggs played for the Red Sox for a lot of years. Frank Thomas for the White Sox for all those years. Cecil Fielder played for the Tigers, I believe it was. But George Brett on the Royals, man. We all remember that scene where George Brett was accused of using the tar on the baseball bat, and he comes running out of the dugout. That's George Brett, right? One of the great scenes, one of the great moments and memories of Major League Baseball history that I remember always watching and seeing them play that over and over again. Gary Sheffield that I mentioned earlier in the video. Shout out to Gary Sheffield. I always liked Gary Sheffield. Gary Carter that played for the New York Mets. The Montreal Expos, was, one of the key members of the New York Mets in 1986 in the mid to late 80s. He was part of that Mets team, man. Like I said, Keith Hernandez, another guy that I wrote down. Shout out to Keith Hernandez. But Gary Carter was one of my favorite players, a class act individual, man. Like I said, representing the New York Mets very well. But, they had a bunch of guys on that team. Gary Carter. Kirby Puckett, another great player, played for Minnesota Twins for all these years. Kirby Puckett. Shout out to Paul Molitor. Paul Molitor, another guy, played for the Milwaukee Brewers, I believe, for like his entire career. These guys played for like one team for like 20 years, man. Shout out to Doc Gooden, right? Played on the New York Mets team. I remember Doc Gooden was another player that to me could have been the greatest pitcher of all time, had that potential, but we all know the drugs, derailed his career. But Doc Gooden came in the league with that kind of stuff, man. I'm talking about, you have a Doc Gooden and a Darryl Strawberry. These guys were transcendent talents that just got derailed, due to bad decisions that they made in their careers. We all remember guys like Randy Johnson, right? Randy Johnson, like 6'10", 6'11", the pitcher, right? Randy Johnson. I used to like Randy Johnson because he had like an attitude about him, man, and I liked it because he was just kind of like a mean, nasty dude, and I was okay with that kind of stuff. I didn't like him when he came to the Yankees. He seemed like he got soft when he came to the Yankees, and he didn't really play good in the Yankees. He didn't fit on the Yankees. But on Arizona, Seattle Mariners, man, Randy Johnson, man, dude was scary. He was scary, that Randy Johnson. He was. Andre Dawson, another great player. Andre Dawson, man, those videos going really long, guys. But shout out to Andre Dawson, another guy that doesn't get mentioned much. Dave Winfield, shout out to Dave Winfield, doesn't get mentioned much. Another guy who played for a long, long time. Dave Winfield played for like 10 different teams, man. But Dave Winfield is one of the greatest athletes of all time that never gets mentioned. Never gets mentioned. Dave Winfield, I believe, was drafted by Major League Baseball. I believe he was drafted by the NFL, and he was drafted, I want to say, by the NBA or played college basketball. I want to say Dave Winfield could have played like 3 different sports, man. He was sensational, Dave Winfield. Doesn't get talked about much as far as the greatest athletes of all time, but Dave Winfield's up there, man. Don Manley, I mentioned Don Manley earlier. I told you that was my uncle's favorite player when I was growing up. My uncle had a whole Yankees room, and this is my mother's youngest brother. So I remember at this time, I was young. He was probably like in his 30s, and Don Manley was his favorite guy, man. Like I said, he had a whole room of Yankee stuff. He had the cutout of Don Manley, the cardboard cut of Don Manley. So shout out to Don Manley, man. All those years on the New York Yankees, man. A really good player. Like I mentioned, Barry Larkin, man. Shout out to Barry Larkin, another great player. Played for the Cincinnati Reds, if I remember correctly, a bunch of years. Barry Larkin. Of course, I remember Robin Yount. My name is Robin, and Robin Yount. When your name is Robin and you're growing up in the 80s like that, right? And people are making fun of your name. Like I told you, man, my dad and my mom, they really They gave me a hard time. I had a hard time with that name growing up, man. Kids are relentless. Rockin' Robin, right? Batman and Robin. Robin Hood. Robin's a girl's name. I would hear all the time, oh, you have a name of a girl, man. Robin's a girl's name. So I would always look, for inspiration for other people named Robin. So Robin Williams, the comedian, was a big inspiration for me because his name was Robin. And he was a great comedian, right? So any of the Robins, I would always look into. And Robin Young was a great baseball player. Played for the Milwaukee Brewers for all those years, man. So shout out to Robin Young. Kirk Gibson, another great player, Kirk Gibson. I remember one of my first baseball gloves. You guys remember you have a baseball glove and it would have like the autograph of a player inside of it, right? Like their name, autograph. And I remember the first baseball glove that I ever got was a Kirk Gibson glove. It's a Kirk Gibson autograph in the inside of the glove, right? It was a Kirk Gibson glove, man. That was the first glove I ever had. We all remember Kirk Gibson with the home run, right? When he's going around the bases, limping, right? In the World Series for the Dodgers. Tommy Lasorda going crazy. That's Kirk Gibson, man. Shout out to Kirk Gibson. Like I mentioned, Jose Canseco, Keith Hernandez, Joe Carter, right? Another great player. Remember, Roberto Alomar, Mike Piazza, Mariano Rivera, Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux, John Smoltz. I think that's all the guys I wrote down, man. Like I said, my man Ken Griffey Jr. So shout out to all those guys, man. Those videos were super long. Is Barry Bonds the greatest baseball player of all time? As far as Darryl Strawberry is concerned, yes. As far as a lot of people are concerned, yes. Like I said, you can argue him with other great players, man. It's hard in baseball to quantify or put your finger on the greatest baseball player of all time. Like I said, to me, Ken Griffey Jr. was the guy when I was growing up. Like I said, in the early 90s, man, to mid-90s, Ken Griffey Jr. was sensational. But Barry Bonds, like I said, if you told me he's greatest of all time, I don't have any argument that, man. The dude could do everything. He was sensational. Like I said, he has 2 Hall of Fame careers, and he should be in the Hall of Fame, Barry Bonds. There's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame for Major League Baseball that were really bad people that did things off the field that were bad. I'm talking about bad, guys. And they're in there. So we have to understand this. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.